Could the Dallas Cowboys select another round one offensive lineman? We'll get into it next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're taking a look at the top three offensive tackles, in the first round of the NFL draft. It was discussing about if the Cowboys could make a pick there at number 12. We know that they want to re-emphasize the run game this offseason. So, Landon, let's start with LSU's Will Campbell, who, in terms of the consensus board, he is right now 6 overall, viewed as one of the top players in this class. What did you see when you watched him on tape?
Yeah, there's a solid reason for that. I mean, the guy has multiple years of starting in the SEC, has a bunch of high-level tape. I think the 24 tape wasn't as good as the 23 tape. The 23 tape, like if he had been able to replicate what he did last year, I mean, again, like there's a couple of different ifs in this guy's tape that if one thing was different, this guy's a top 5 pick, like without a doubt, right? So
he still might be anyways, right?
He still might be anyways. That's true. Let's get into it. You mentioned it. He's got really good size. I mean, 6'5", 323. He looks physically like a professional NFL offensive lineman. The issue is the arms, right? And we're going to talk about it a lot. And it's really the main negative with Will Campbell. I think that there's some other aspects about him, but the arm length is going to be something that some people are just not going to be able to get over. We'll talk about that at some point. Plays with great leverage and flexibility, has great eyes. He's got incredibly high football IQ. Great mirror, agile on his feet, can miss at times with wide hands. So he's got some hand stuff that we can clean up a little bit, which will leave his chest exposed at times. Sometimes it can lead to some holding. He's skilled in the art of staying between his man and the QB. He's incredible at recovery. He does a really great job of refitting his hands and then refitting his feet, all while staying between him and the quarterback. So even if he loses initially, he fights constantly throughout the snap, and he doesn't just like lose quick and then give up. Like he will give second effort and find a way to kind of refit. And I think that this is something that not enough offensive linemen come out of college with the ability to do. And I think this is why you think you see him at the top of all these offensive line boards, is that he may have limitations. And again, we're talking about him, but the ability to be smart, tough, and then we'll talk about this too, strong, and then be able to recover, like that's the minimum requirement to be a professional NFL player. And he meets all those requirements. Good recovery, plays with a wide base, strikes with good technique and a solid base, jolts defenders with his punch. He's got really great rotational strength. I saw so many snaps where he was the lead blocker in a run scheme, and it was coming behind him, and he's able to get his hands on his target and then literally just torque them out of the hole. I saw him take Walter Nolan, who we'll talk later this week. I saw him take Walter Nolan and physically move him a gap over so that the run could come behind where he was supposed to be and then seal him off. He's just got ready-made strength. He keeps refitting his hands and resetting until he beats you, basically. Normally the issues arm length. Normally the issues you see with arm length are guys get into your chest too much, and in those cases you'll see him get long armed and bull rushed, or after that happens too much, you see guys react to stop that by waist bending and trying to initiate first contact with the pass rusher. You don't see that with Campbell as much. He definitely has aspects that you see his arm length a problem, but Campbell's patience and his hand technique are kind of countermeasures to that. So I think you don't see the length show up as much as it probably should at 33-inch arms. I think he is a immediate high-level starter at guard or center if he can play either one of those positions. I don't think he has to move in from tackle. I think he can play tackle, and I think he can play tackle at a high level. But depending on your scheme and how you want to play your protections, you may not want to play a tackle. So I think you draft this guy and you're thrilled that you've got a decade plus high level plus starter in the NFL. And then you figure out where you want to play him once you kind of fit him into your offensive line. I'll also mention that he is working with Duke at OL Performance. So again, just, kind of squeezing all the juice out. I love this guy. He's a throwback. He's an old school offensive lineman. And in a league where I've been trending more towards making sure that you come into the league with ready-made strength, I think he does that, and he's ready to compete at an NFL level, especially in the run game.
So one of the things I like to do is watch these tackles against the best competition. And you can go back and watch him in 2023 against Jared Verse. You can watch him in 2024 against Nick Scorton and Shamar Stewart. To me, to me, I saw several times on tape where he's lunging out of his snap, right? And I think it's because he doesn't have the arm length. And there are times where he'll lunge and some of these longer defensive ends can get to him. And now I will say, I think he does a good job of recovering generally. But man, there's some reps, especially if you watch that Texas A&M game where he's like hopping backwards as he's trying to like reestablish his footing. And I just wondered, like, what's that going to look like in the NFL against, big, long defensive ends? I'm generally somebody that doesn't care about arm length. But to me, I thought it showed up a little bit on his tape. Here's some of the advanced numbers if you're watching with us on YouTube right now from Pro Football Focus. 61st percentile pass block grade, 71st percentile true pass set grade, 49th percentile no play action grade, 31st percentile gap run grade, 71st percentile zone run grade. I don't think he's a tackle in the NFL. And again, this is just the way I see it. I think he's a guard. And I guess I just feel like if you're drafting this guy to be a guard at 12, he better be an all-pro guy. And I like him. I just don't love him.
I think if you're playing him at guard, like, he's going to be mentioned as an all-pro not this season, but the following season. I think that's how good he is, how smart he is. I also think that, you just don't find guys that have the kind of power he does in his hands. And I agree. Like, the thing that about Will Campbell that's going to like annoy some folks, especially, compared to someone like, Simmons at times, honestly, is it doesn't always look pretty. It doesn't look pretty a lot, honestly, but it's effective. And I think that's the thing that I think to me is what I'm looking for nowadays, is that everybody's going to get beat. Like, I think when you watch offensive linemen, like, the idea is not to see how many times are they being beat, like, because all offensive linemen get beat.
Of course. It's
what happens when you get beat. Like, initially, are you able to recover? And there are so many times, and even that A&M tape that you're talking about, I agree. There are times when he strong sets, like, right, he tries to quick set a guy and he gets beat by length. But what ends up happening? We've talked about Shamar Stewart. We know he didn't get those sacks. So what ends up happening is that Will is able to recover, get his hands on, and push the guy past the pocket. And it'd be one thing if that happened, like, a couple different snaps, but it happens all the time, right? And you could see that as a negative or as a positive. But to me, what I see is a guy who, no matter what, will find a way to make it work. He's a problem solver as an offensive lineman, which I love. I think, some of the issues that you mentioned, which I think are there for sure, like, you can certainly try to find a way to mitigate them by moving him inside, giving him less space to have to work with. But I think he has the athleticism, the footwork. You watch him up front and he looks like this big lumbering guy. His stance is really tall, like, pre-snap. But after the snap, you see him drop his hips. You see him shadow mirror guys really well. He moves really well for a 320-pound guy. And again, just that knowledge of how to recover even when you've lost early in a snap. I think that that's something that a lot of offensive linemen who were just better athletes than everyone they played against all the time, they don't know how to do that. They have to learn that skill in the NFL. That's not something that Will Campbell's going to have.
Last thing before we move on. Because I've been doing these expert consensus boards for a while, I've consistently seen his name inside the top 6 sometimes even inside the top 5 players. So when I really turned on the tape, I was hoping to see like a dominating offensive lineman. And you just don't see that. Now, I do think he's a good player. But I guess my thing is if you think he's only a guard in the NFL, and that's my opinion, I think he's a guard in the NFL, then I struggle to see him as a top 6, top 7 player in this class. How would I feel about him with Dallas? I think he'd have to play guard in Dallas, and I think he'd be a good player. I also just don't know if that's the best bang for your buck at pick number 12.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem taking a guard at 12, and I certainly don't have look, I don't even, like I said, I don't think you just have to play him at guard, but if you wanted to just play him at guard, I don't think I'd be upset with it because I think he's a culture changer, and I think that's one thing about this offensive line that it could still use. As part of the reason that we want Brock Hoffman, I think at this point, is just because we want some kind of like, nasty, smart toughness that added into this offensive line that it feels like you've got a lot of athletes on, right? We'll talk about Simmons and Membou. I think those guys are more athletes, right, at the position. I think that they're really good at that. But I think Will Campbell brings a level of technical prowess, of toughness, of smarts that can raise the whole floor of your offensive line. I think that's why people are trying to potentially see if he could play center, right? It's because I think that they think, you put this guy at the pivot and he kind of dictates the tone for the whole offensive line. I don't know that you necessarily need to do that. I just think that he brings talent, prowess, and a mindset and mentality that's hard to kind of, quantify on tape a little bit.
You mentioned Josh Simmons. Let's talk about him next, the Ohio State tackle. We'll get to him in segment 2. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Sometimes I miss the opening tip-off of a game, but I still want to bet on it. So that's where FanDuel comes in. The app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are discussing some round 1 offensive linemen that the Cowboys could be interested in at pick number 12. And let's talk about Josh Simmons, the left tackle for Ohio State. What did you see in his tape?
Yeah, unfortunately, the first thing we got to mention is that he got injured, I think, in the 6th or 7th. It was Oregon, right, that he got injured in that game. So, unfortunately, we didn't get a whole season to look at him as the starter at left tackle. But really, really impressive of what you saw. And I think, you can kind of look at his whole tape and get an idea of the guy. A bit, like, undersized in the sense that he's 6'5" and he's 310, but it's like a very solid build. This guy's like an athlete. I think we talked about that in comparison to kind of to what you see with Will Campbell, who looks more like a kind of an old school offensive lineman, bigger, maybe not sloppy, but, just like a heavier build. This guy is more the kind of smooth power forward build, right? Like of an offensive tackle that like looks incredibly athletic and that shows on tape as well. He's excellent athlete in all directions. He fires his feet out of a coiled stance. You just see him like coil up and just explode into defensive ends. Speed to get to the second level, plus the lateral quickness to kind of slow down, bring himself together, and to block second level players. He plays with strong, low, and leveraged base. He strikes on blocks well with strong hands. Excellent on backside cutoffs on zone runs. He dips down and drives with his legs in contact in the run game. He has an effective shoulder shiver on double teams. He's a finisher. He puts bodies on the ground in the run game, which is something you worry about with these kind of more, finesse, I guess is what I would call them, offensive tackles, the more athletic guys. His hands need better accuracy and run and pass blocking. His punch can get wide, and I think that's going to be an issue for him because that seems to happen quite a bit. There's just times when you see him throw his punch, and then he doesn't necessarily always get called for it, but you'll see his hand on the backside of the defender's shoulder pads, right? And you're like, and he's had a problem with this in the past. That he started out in San Diego State before he transferred to Ohio State, and he had 17 holding penalties, 17 penalties at San Diego State. I'm assuming a lot of them were holding, honestly, just based on this. He had, I think, 7 his second year at Ohio State in limited snaps. He really did do a good job of kind of cutting down the penalties in those 6 games of 24, but you still see it. Like, I think there's just times when it just didn't get called as much as it was in previous seasons. Even though he's done a good job of settling down the penalties, you still need to make sure he gets his hands inside. He definitely has some room to grow a little bit, just like in his frame. But as of right now, like, he is kind of very typical, extremely athletic, guy, the kind of guy that, of course, you would see playing on Ohio State, right? Just a freak athlete who's good at what he does. The injury obviously set him back. And it was interesting to see that they were really able to kind of take his injury in stride, right? And and finish the season obviously as the national champions and just kind of swing a guy out at left tackle. So I don't really know if that speaks to him like of just Ohio State's depth, or if the fact that the scheme is helping him a lot. But I like what I saw on tape from him a lot. I don't think he's a finished product by any stretch of the imagination, just because he doesn't have a ton of experience. But the ball of clay that he is really, really something. And I don't think you're far off from a guy that's ready to be a starter in this league. And I think with that skill set, he's going to really be something once he hits his his prime.
Agree with everything you said. My biggest issue is when you're drafting guys early in the first round, and this for the Cowboys at pick number 12, and you're already drafting a player who's got a serious knee injury. I believe it's a patella tendon tear. Probably going to miss all of training camp, maybe even some of the regular season. That is a little concerning. It's like I don't like drafting injured guys because we see how long it takes a lot of these injured players to get back to full strength. Look at Terrence Steele, who had a major knee injury. He really hasn't ever been able to get back to the player that we saw pre-injury. So I just get really stressed out about drafting these guys really high. And with somebody like Simmons, who is so, I don't want to say he's so raw, but he's underdeveloped.
Sure.
It's like, where do you value this player? Here are some of the stable metrics from PFF. Overall, pretty good. 80th pass blocking grade, 92nd true pass set grade, 51st percentile no play action grade, 60th percentile gap run grade, 40th percentile zone run grade. And I guess that's my biggest issue, Landon, is I don't think he's a dominating run blocker. I think you're getting somebody who is a pass blocker first. And again, if the Cowboys are trying to build an offensive line that can be dominating on the run, he's probably going to need to be a left tackle. And I just don't think he's somebody that's going to be a difference maker in the run game on that left side.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, look, I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't be shocked if that zone run blocking grade was based mostly on how he blocks, percentage wise and just by numbers, how he blocks on the front side, right? Because I think that's the thing, right? Is that he's a great athlete and he's got enough strength and he's a finisher that on the backside of he can make the cutoffs, he can get to the 3 technique, he can reach whoever he needs. I think on the front side, he's not necessarily moving guys out of their gaps, right?
Well, in that way, he reminds me a little of Tyler Guyton playing left tackle.
Yeah. I think it feels like he may be a little bit more experienced, at least because he's been playing left side, right, at this point. But I do wonder if, if you're talking about for the Cowboys, I don't think he's more experienced than Guyton is now, right? So, like, the question becomes, like, do you draft him and then move Guyton out? I think there's lots of, I like Josh Simmons. Each one of these guys have, like, one thing. If you could change one thing, they would probably be top 10 picks. Will Campbell is his arm length. We'll talk about Membou's height probably. Mm-hmm. But for Simmons, it's like, it really is like, if he had just played the whole season, I feel like this guy would be easily walk-in OT1 because he has all the elements.
He was getting better.
He was getting better. He was playing on a team that was going to play a lot. So I think the Simmons injury situation, it's not just that, oh, do you want to draft an injured player? It's like, oh, do you want to draft a guy who's injured, but also got injured like halfway through a season where he was trying to prove it to you that he was worth a first round pick, and you kind of got an incomplete grade from him.
It's really hard. And if you're talking about the Cowboys, in this situation, I just wonder, like, what does your offensive line look like if it's, let's say it's Josh Simmons at left tackle and Tyler Guyton at right tackle. Those guys are incredibly athletic. And if you're trying to build an offense that wants to throw the ball 45, 50 times a game, I think those would be awesome tackles. But if you're trying to build a more balanced offense where you can actually blow, defenders off the ball, I'm not sure that's the best tackle pairing together.
Well, yeah, and I mean, to be fair, too, to Guyton, like Guyton's 25 pounds heavier than this guy. Like Guyton, I think Guyton may come back next year and be a good run blocker just as he learns some technique stuff, because I think he's got the power. I worry about Simmons. I mean, like I said, I think he's tough and I think he is strong. But again, he is a little bit undersized. He is more of what, like you're saying, a zone guy. I would feel like athletic. I think he can play in some gap scheme stuff, but I don't think that that's like his forte necessarily, which is funny because that's not what the stable metrics said. But I think just like the physical side of him, you worry like he's coming in injured, he's coming in unproven, and maybe he's a little undersized to kind of be bossing folks in the run game. Yeah, it's a lot that you really would have loved to see him kind of prove a little bit more during the 2024 season. Unfortunately, the injury kind of ruined that.
To me, this is a guy that you draft like in the 20s, like in the range where Dallas drafted Tyler Guyton, rather than at 12. But unfortunately, we've seen a lot of mocks where he's being drafted right around the Cowboys pick. So something to keep an eye on. All right, let's talk about one of the biggest risers over the last month in the NFL draft community. That is Armand Membou from Missouri. We will get to him next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcast. All right, Lena, let's talk about Armand Membou, a offensive tackle from Missouri. If you don't like shorter offensive tackles, you're not going to love him. But right now on the expert consensus board, 13th overall, and Dane Brugler, who just put out his top 100, has him 8th overall on his big board. What did you see from his tape?
Well, if you don't like shorter offensive linemen, then you're discriminating against some really good offensive linemen, to be honest. That's funny. I keep hearing that this guy, snuck up on a lot of draft analysts, but this guy was a 4-star offensive lineman coming out of high school. He was a really top prospect. I mean, obviously the height has always been a thing, right? He's 6'3", and I think he's just 6'3", right? But you don't. Like, did you see a short player when you watched him on tape necessarily? Like, I didn't see a guy who looked like he was short very necessarily. So
he doesn't play small. Now you do wonder what it's going to look like once you get to the NFL and you're going up against 265, 270 pound edges. But I don't think his height. We really haven't seen very many offensive tackles in the NFL where height is a problem for these guys.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Is I mean, I wish we could smash cut to William Lampkin blocking Deion Walker right now at the Senior Bowl, because I think the thing is it's all about leverage, in when you're blocking folks, and I think that's line one for this guy. Right? Like, is that he's a former wrestler. He's a multi-sport athlete, played tennis and some other things in high school. He's just a really great athlete for a guy that's 6'3", 325. And because, we talk about it all the time, wrestling is such a huge benefit for offensive and defensive linemen, because it teaches you about grappling, it teaches you about hand placement, but most importantly, it teaches you about playing low and about being flexible and having leverage. He's a powerful finisher, right? He's a pancake maker. He's, like I said, he's flexible and he has balance throughout his kick slide. He moves incredibly well. I saw him play, mostly you see him playing right tackle. You did see him play a little bit on the left side when Missouri actually used him in a tackle over tight end situation a couple times, which was really fun to see. And they would run wide zone on that side. Can he? The question is going to be not about his game. It's can he stay at offensive tackle at his size, right? He's a physical player. I mean, he played in the SEC and didn't have really any problems with any of the top folks. I mean, you go and watch him play against, guys that are going to be playing on Sunday, and he has no issues kind of getting out and engaging with them.
I did see Stewart one time, Shamar Stewart. Was at a run play, just absolutely chuck him to the side and make a tackle. But I mean, as a pass blocker, you don't really see any issues.
No, and I think as a pass blocker throughout the season, he was good. I think as a run blocker, he got better. Like, that was one thing that was exciting to see, was he got a lot better as the season went on. Like, as the season went on, he played with a lot more strength than he did earlier. And I thought that he really started to show improvement in that position. In that specific area. This is a guy that, to me, I think he can play tackle in a zone blocking heavy scheme, right? Like, where, you're going to be using him on the move a lot, and kind of getting out in space and hitting targets. But I think if you aren't doing a zone heavy scheme, it would be tough, I think, to kind of play him at tackle full time, right? I think he could be a really, really great guard in any scheme, right? If you're asking me to put him in an ideal situation, I think if you can put him at guard in a zone blocking scheme, he would really, really thrive because of his athleticism.
I was say, in some ways, he reminds me of Tyler Smith that way, where, like, you get one of these bigger offensive tackles, because Tyler Smith's not very tall. I think Tyler Smith is 6'4", but you get that 325, 330-pound guy that can move and plays with power. Now we're talking about a guy that can be a Pro Bowl, all-pro level guard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what you're asking him to do, double team, climb to the second level and hit a target, pass protect, with the guy with the body on either side of you. I think those are things that, he doesn't play with, like, the same kind of wide base that Will Campbell plays with.
Yeah.
But I think that he still is such a good foot athlete, and especially inside, folks aren't going to be able to get around him. He's really, because he is a full 325 and he's shorter, so he is wide, but he moves really well because he's able to get low to the ground. So I really like Membou a lot. I think that he, like I said, I think he can play tackle in some situations, but I think he would really, really thrive inside a guard.
And here are his advanced numbers via Pro Football Focus: 93rd percentile pass block grade, 82nd percentile true pass set grade, 95th percentile no play action grade, 53rd percentile gap run grade, 87th percentile zone blocking grade. So the advanced numbers are really good, off the chart. Here, one of the things I went and looked at, Landon, was how many offensive tackles last year started games that were under 6'4". There were only two: Zach Tom for the Packers, and Chuma Udoga for the Cowboys. That's it. That's the entire list. So there's not very many of these guys out there that are the sub 6'4" offensive tackles, which makes me think he probably is a guard in the NFL, which is fine. It's not a problem at all. Again, it's if he's the number 8 overall, or the number 8 player on your board, do you feel comfortable drafting him inside the top 10 if he's only a guard? And for the Cowboys, do you take another guard prospect with your first round pick? I don't know. Again, all three of these guys, I was hoping to like a little bit more, and I just didn't love them.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think these are all, to me, middle of the first, back half of the first, offensive linemen, right? Like, where they're starters that can come in, I think, could play right away, but they're definitely something that you're working around in each one of these cases.
Well,
right?
and that's
Simmons,
the thing, is, like, if you're spending the number 12 pick, you're hoping that guy can eventually become your best offensive lineman rather than your third best.
But that's the function of this draft, not of their players. Like,
well,
that, you know what I'm saying?
And that, for me, that's me. That means I don't want to draft an offensive tackle in round 1 if I don't have to.
Okay, I think that gets to the issue there, which I think is fair. I think that the problem I have with the way that some of these folks have been talking about some of these players is that, like for Campbell specifically, it's like it's an expectations game, right?
Yeah.
Because they expected him to be an elite play. And he just had a down year, but he didn't get worse. It's just, this is him battling through some stuff. He lost his guard at a certain point that he'd been playing with his most of his career, and he was dealing with some stuff too. So I think I agree. Each one of these guys have warts that you would prefer not to take, kind of where you're taking them at 12. I think Zack Martin was taken at 11 or 12,
16.
Oh, 16. 16. Yeah. So it wasn't, so it's like even higher than that. And you
in an all-time great draft. You go back and look at 2014 draft. Like I don't know how much higher Zack Martin would have gone because it's just such a great draft.
It's such a loaded draft. And I think the opposite is here in the first round, right? Like at a certain point, there's like 3 blue chip players. And then basically after that, it's like a huge valley. So you just kind of have to pick the player that you like. And I think that's why a guy like Will Campbell will go high, is because there aren't any other kind of elite players at the position. And Will Campbell is a guy with a high floor, maybe more than these other two. So I agree with you that I think these are tough guys to be taking at 12 for sure. But someone like Will Campbell, because he just has a high floor, is going to go high simply because of the dearth of players to be available at the kind of 5 to 22 range.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.